Good morning, Ori. Yes, that's right. Fresh from his meeting with the RBA Governor Philip Lowe, I'm here live with the Treasurer of Australia, Josh Frydenberg. Josh, thank you. Oh, Treasurer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice to be with you.
Now, first things first, before we get to the RBA, congratulations on what was a historic election victory. Now, depending on who you ask, you get like a different reason of events. But for you, what do you think really drove people to turn out for your party on the weekend? What really won the battle for you?
Well, I think it was a battle of competing economic narratives. We believed in lower taxes, a stronger economy, more jobs, higher wages, and we have the policies to deliver that. And our economic record has shown that over the nearly 6 years we've been in office, we've created 1.3 million new jobs. The Labor Party had a very high taxing, high spending agenda, which would have stifled aspiration, innovation and cost jobs, as well as lead to lower wages, and that was rejected by the Australian people.
Now, you met with the RBA Governor Philip Lowe this morning. Yesterday in his speech he flagged that the government needs to be perhaps more proactive in terms of stimulus when it comes to infrastructure, policies to drive business growth and innovation. But do you feel that your policies that you did outline in the budget meet that need, or do you think there's still more that you can do based on your discussions today?
Well, our policies absolutely meet that pro-growth agenda, and that's what we discussed with the Governor this morning. The emphasis on infrastructure and our $100 billion infrastructure plan, and the fact that the pipeline is very strong, and projects that have been on the drawing board for half a century, like Snowy 2.0, or like a second airport here in Sydney, or the airport rail link in Melbourne, or fast rail between Melbourne and Geelong. These are nation-building projects which will create thousands of jobs and be absolutely important to busting the congestion in our cities and unlocking the potential in our regions. We talked about the importance of the tax cuts, and the Governor acknowledges how important that tax relief promised in the budget is to increasing disposable income for Australian households, and that money will be spent across the economy, boosting economic activity too.
Now, you mentioned the Snowy Hydro 2.0 plan, so both the Prime Minister and yourself, you reiterated your commitment to existing coal-fired plants. Now, putting aside whether or not renewables are ready or even efficient enough to provide baseload power, depending on who you ask again, has your government looked at anything like further investment in gas power, considering there's a lot less emissions, or 50 to 60%, rather than putting more money into coal?
Well, as you know, the ACCC did a major study into the energy markets, and they made it very clear that there was opportunities for new baseload generation to come into the market, and government to play a role there. And a number of those projects do involve gas. Gas is a transition fuel. Gas is able to stabilise the energy system at a time when more intermittent sources of power are coming online, particularly wind and solar. So our view is that it's inevitable that more wind, more solar, more renewable energy will come into the system, particularly as it becomes very price competitive. At the same time, though, you need that baseload generation, you need that backup, and that's where Snowy 2.0 is really important, because it will be like a big battery for the east coast of Australia, as well as unlocking the potential in Tasmania with a second interconnected to the mainland, as well as capitalising on their pumped hydro facilities and opportunities, and also their wind capacity.
On that as well, I've spoken to quite a number of CEOs, and this is like large scale and at the lower end, who've been balking at the current cost of energy. They're suggesting they're going to look elsewhere to grow their businesses, places like the US where it's a third of the price for power, along with their pro-business agendas there. Are lowering prices for industry going to be a firm priority for your government this term?
Well, lowering prices for all Australians, individuals and businesses, is critical. And I think getting more gas out of the ground is a big part of that, because, as you know, it's an important feedstock for industry, it's, as well as being that transition fuel. And I'd call upon the state governments to start developing some of their gas that's under the ground. They're the ones who own the resource, and we've always believed that you can, in a scientifically proven and an environmentally sustainable way, develop unconventional gas. And that's onshore gas. And Victoria, for example, has huge resources there, 40 years worth of resources that are untapped. Here in New South Wales they have some as well, and they're going through processes for that, as well as in the Northern Territory. And the Northern Territory government has made that a priority. But I think gas that is untapped, and particularly unconventional onshore gas, is a real opportunity, and that will help business.
Treasurer, I know you're pressed for time. I just want to ask one more question. Now, the general consensus appears to be we're set for some kind of slowdown in global growth this year. The US-China trade spat continues as like a significant downside risk. So should this become a definitive reality, if we see the growth downslide the way the IMF and everyone else is predicting, would you be willing to scrap the surplus in any way and stimulate the economy enough to keep the ship steady?
We're absolutely committed to the surplus as outlined in the budget, and that's $45 billion worth of surpluses over the forward estimates, $7.1 billion surplus in 2019-2020, and the elimination of net debt, government's net debt, by the end of the decade. Let's be very clear, this is the first surplus in more than a decade for Australia, and it's built on our strong jobs growth. It's built on our responsible spending, which has seen spending growth come down to the lowest level of any government in 50 years, and the fact that the proportion of working-age Australians who are on welfare is the lowest in 30 years. This is what our policies have helped deliver for the Australian economy. We're not complacent. There are some economic headwinds internationally and domestically that we face, but we have the plan, as laid out in the budget, to grow the economy in the face of those headwinds, and that is our priority.
Just quickly, do you have any bet for who do you reckon is going to be the opposition leader?
It's not for me to comment on who the opposition leader will be, but what I would say is the Labor Party have shown that in their DNA they always believe in higher taxes, and the coalition believes in lower taxes. Lower taxes encourages aspiration, innovation, perspiration and personal responsibility.
Thank you so much for your time, Treasurer. Absolute pleasure. Oriel, back to you.
All right, interesting conversation there, Will. Thank you so much for that. The Australian Treasurer